So this show is going to be next spring, and it's going to consist of about 120 pieces, I believe. That's what I heard, or that's what I read somewhere. And it's going to be an interesting show because basically what they're doing is showing a number of works on paper along with some of the oils. So they're drawings and paintings that were thematically building up to what became a painting at the end. But in some ways, to see takes time. So what she does is develop an idea, and it's not like they're really directly preparatory sketches, but exploring an idea. So basically, it's going to be kind of the role that they played in the thematic development of an idea. So I threw in one of the poppies right at the beginning so that everybody knows who we're dealing with. You know, her flowers are probably the most well-known work of hers, although they only comprise about 10% of her output. There's about 200 of the flower paintings, and she did approximately 2,000 pieces in her lifetime. So at least that's what we know about at this stage. Now, all right, I'm going to get started in earnest at this point. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. And I will try my best to answer them. Given the fact that Joan isn't here, she won't be, you know, kind of like checking things out for me, but we'll do our best. So we're good. All right. So basically, she's in these drawings and in the little watercolors and things like that, she's developing a visual language. You know, the poppy everyone knows, but I'm not going to concentrate so much on them. Below is a photograph of Georgia O'Keeffe and Alfred Stieglitz. And it actually, right now at the beginning of this talk, it might not be a bad idea to talk a little bit about Alfred Stieglitz and his role in kind of fostering artists in the early part of the 20th century in America who were exploring modernism. He was instrumental in the early part of Georgia O'Keeffe's career, for sure. He was mentor, gallerist, promoter, lover, photographer of her. So basically, he was he studied in Europe. His father actually was fairly wealthy. The family was fairly wealthy, at least in the 1800s and into the early 20th century. His father sold his business so that Alfred could get a European education. So the entire family moved to Europe, and Stieglitz studied, was really, kind of up on everything which was in the avant-garde. What he studied was photography. And at the time, that was a kind of new cutting edge science. And so, and photography itself was considered kind of a hobby. It was not a real profession, wasn't considered artwork. And that's one of the things that Stieglitz changed. He really pushed photography as a artistic medium. And he, was very daring in his taste as far as art is concerned. He began the gallery in the United States in 1905. Started out as a photography gallery, but also showed cutting edge work in America. He was one of the first people to show Cézanne, Matisse, Picasso, Braque. So he brought the avant-garde European art to New York. He also was fostering modernist American painters. So, all right, enough on Stieglitz. You get the idea. George O'Keeffe, 1887 to 1986. So she was 99 when she died. Born to a large family on a farm near Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. She was the second of 7 children, two of whom were also artists. 2 of her sisters were artists. She attended public school but had private art lessons. And in 1905 to 1906, she attends the Chicago Art Institute, which is no small thing at the turn of the century. To be able to even get into a prestigious art school was something. And you see this vase of flowers to the right, which was painted kind of before she entered the Chicago Art Institute. But you can see already that she has quite a touch. And then in 1907, 1908, she goes to New York with a friend and attends classes at the Art Students League. And at the Art Students League, she studies with William Merritt Chase. On the right is a still life by Chase, and on the left is a still life by George O'Keeffe. And she won the Chase Still Life Award and got to attend these summer sessions up in Lake George. So she was painting landscape in a rather impressionist style at that point. She sees modernist exhibits at the Alfred Stieglitz Gallery. Actually, the name of his gallery was 291. That was the address of the location. And she got to see modernist works. So she wasn't very satisfied with what was happening with the Chase work, though technically she learned a lot about painting. It was not the direction that she wanted to go in. And she does commercial artwork for a while out in Chicago, teaches in Virginia, in Texas, and South Carolina over the next, 8 years. And she actually stopped painting for a couple of years, just trying to figure out what her voice was, what she wanted to do. So while she was in let's see, in Virginia, or was it in South Carolina? Anyway, during the summers, she would go to take classes at Virginia, um, at the University of Virginia, and she was exposed to one of the students of this guy, Arthur Wesley Dow. Now, this was a very different way of approaching and thinking about painting. So she attends Columbia Teachers College at Columbia University in New York, where Dow is actually teaching. And you see this composition, Arthur Wesley Dow. This was a very, let's see, influential book that he published. And what these are is something he adapted from I believe it was Japanese, but it's definitely an Asian notion. What they call this is notan. So you break down your composition into areas of black and white and try and make those spaces, that composition work. Those shapes, the interaction of the shapes, the positive and negative areas, and make an interesting composition out of just those big flat shapes. And you can see two of his paintings on the left. Painting is essentially a rhythmic harmony of colored spaces. Paint beautiful spaces. That's a quote from him. And this actually was a very profound experience for O'Keeffe. It was a very different way of thinking about painting. She was exposed to Asian philosophy, to Taoist ideas about positive and negative, about the yin-yang business, about the rhythms of nature, and about trying to tune into the energies of things and how those rhythms work. So he actually stopped painting in color for a period of time. I believe it was at least a year, if not longer, and did these charcoal drawings that were really kind of out of her experience walking out in the woods and walking in nature. And she would take that back to her studio and synthesize it and try and come up with these forms. And so let's see, okay, they are inspired by nature, not direct copies of nature. She's looking at rhythm. She's looking at how shapes interact, what the textures are of those things. And again, there's the sense of spiral. I included this pine cone and this other abstract piece, this abstract drawing by her. I thought the rhythm in them kind of mirrored each other in some way. And so out of kind of close study of these forms in nature, she began to try and create these rhythms in her paintings, in her drawings, in this case. Just eliminating color as an issue for a period of time was important to her. And you can see here, the spirals, this is something called the golden section or the golden mean. You may have heard of that. And I'm going to talk more about it. The seashell is really a perfect, image of it, but there are these recurring rhythms in nature, and they break down, but there's these similar patterns. Okay. And the golden ratio or golden section, golden mean, golden rectangle, means the side lengths are in the golden ratio. If you take away the square on the left, another rectangle remains. So you can see that here. And the golden section goes on like that. You can keep taking away and adding on into this. Now, there's a kind of soothing effect that this has on an observer. It's unconscious. You don't necessarily know that it's happening, but it's something which has been used in design as an underlying in masterworks, in architecture, in painting, down through the ages. And the mathematics, now some of you may know mathematics better than I, but the Fibonacci sequence is what we're talking about here. And the Fibonacci sequence is, as you can see from the illustration, you take 1 and 1, it becomes 2. You take 2 and 3, it becomes 5. You take 5 and 3, it becomes 8. And this sequence keeps going, and you can keep traveling that sequence through. So the golden spiral is what occurs when you take a line through the golden rectangle and follow that through. Okay. Enough on this. Where I'm coming from with this is, in nature, these forms are something that can be observed, and many artists, Cézanne, Matisse, Mondrian, they're after some universal underlying force, universal underlying structure. And that is, I think, again, something that Georgia O'Keeffe was tuning into with these drawings, and something that she would pursue in various forms throughout her career. Okay. And the other thing which is really common is this business of synesthesia. I have talked about it before a bit. So, these are not, none of this is really literal reproductions of things that are seen in nature, but it's really kind of a compositional structure. The synesthesia stuff, basically, there's a bunch of people in the early part of the 20th century who were interested in trying to translate music into visual art. So somebody like Paul Klee, Kandinsky, Mondrian, and a number of artists in the 20th century, Arthur Dove. I'll show you more of his work in a minute. So at this point, by 1915, Georgia O'Keeffe would have read and seen Kandinsky's work, and read his essay called Concerning the Spiritual in Art. And one of the things that he talks about in there is the correlation between abstract visual art and sound and music. Okay. And this is one of the first pieces that she did when she moved back into color. And you can see this kind of sense of swirling. Again, we're back to Fibonacci. We're back to that golden mean. That kind of rhythmic swirl is in there. Okay. So she is teaching down in Canyon, Texas at this point. She's teaching at one of the colleges down there. And she's doing these small watercolors out there on the prairie and catching the sunrise. Now, on the left is a John Marin. John Marin would have been somebody that she knew very well from Stieglitz. Stieglitz did a number of one-man shows and was very a powerful promoter of Marin's work. Marin was a very well-known in the first half of the 20th century. He was one of the top artists in America. On the right, we've got Morrison Hartley. Again, you know, there's this business of color, of atmosphere, texture. And she would have been showing with both Hartley and Marin in Stieglitz's gallery. Again, back to this no-tan business where there's these simplified shapes, the big, broad shapes interacting. And this is a photograph, beautiful photograph of Georgia O'Keeffe at age 30, doing these watercolors. And she would do these in series, in sequence. So it's really how she's kind of developing ideas. It's not so much a progression, you know, like going from development, you know, into a finished piece, as much as kind of looking at it from different points of view and aspects and slightly different emphasis and amounts of color and all of that. So this is kind of, you know, she probably did a dozen of these. Again, you know, developing these ideas, and they float around, take different forms, but they, you know, recur in different guises. So these were from 1916. This is from 1923. And this one's an oil painting. The other ones were watercolors. And again, back to this synesthesia business, the sound and color correlation forms, and it's not so much that she's listening to music while she's painting these things, though she's thinking of these as rhythm, as the interaction of color creating a mood or a feeling that relates to a sound or music. And this idea was not alien. Arthur Dove, who was another one who was showing with Stieglitz, this foghorn. There's a whole series of these foghorns in different tones. So, and then above is another dove, swing music, Louis Armstrong. Down below on the right is one of my favorites. I love Stu Davis, and so does my wife. We've spent a lot of time looking at his work, and he was very influenced by jazz, and it was very much a part of what he was trying to put together with these kind of buoyant shapes and wonderful color rhythms. Big piece. This is 87 by 173 inches. And okay, so these are Georgia O'Keeffe cityscapes, and she was, influenced by, but had her own take on something which was called precisionism. That was going on. There was a painter by the name of Schiller, and there's a bunch of other guys. Demuth was involved, and they were into architectonic forms and very clean, sharp shapes, and kind of semi-abstracted, but very well observed forms. And these three on the left are more cityscapes by Georgia O'Keeffe. They're really beautifully done and really interesting pieces. The simplification of form, and the play of hard geometric shapes against the clouds and all that. And the other thing to look at in these is her paint application and how she would put on the paint, and the kind of really subtle gradient qualities, from light to dark in various areas, and having those play off of each other, and what those do. In the center one, just having it go from that really beautiful kind of light brown at the bottom in the center building, going up to that really dark at the top, and then that light at the top of the building. Really interesting. And the interplay between lights and darks in these. On the right is a painting by Yvonne Jacquet. This was from the 90s. And she, I personally think that she was definitely, influenced by looking at some of Georgia O'Keeffe's cityscapes, and said, there's still some things to explore in this idea. So, and she's a wonderful painter herself. Georgia O'Keeffe was really a country woman at heart, though her career brought her to New York, and her relationship with Stieglitz. Oh, that's a whole other thing to talk about a little bit more. I mean, basically, she and Stieglitz became lovers in, I guess it was about 1916. He was still married, and they had a very, very torrid affair that was ongoing. And basically what tore apart his marriage is he was doing a photo shoot of Georgia O'Keeffe nude in the apartment, and the wife walked in on it. That really, the wife said, out of here. And he left, although she did not want the marriage to end, and it took years for that to come to an end. Georgia O'Keeffe and Alfred Stieglitz did marry after the divorce, and they remained married as long as Stieglitz lived, although both of them went on to have affairs with different people. But it was very much a powerful relationship that they had with each other. They spent time apart. She in 1927 she discovered New Mexico, and this is actually, I believe, from the period when she was in Texas, but she loved being out in the mountains and in nature. So what she would do is summer out in New Mexico, they would write letters to each other every day. They were really, although there was a lot of pain in the relationship, there was also a very strong bond between them. And they're known to have written over 5,000 letters to each other. Stieglitz and the critics made a big deal out of the feminine, the sexuality expressed in O'Keeffe's work. I mean, this is a very sexy piece. Her flowers were correlated with female genitalia and all that stuff, and they played all this Freudian stuff out. Now, Stieglitz used this as a marketing ploy, in my opinion, but Georgia O'Keeffe was not pleased with this kind of trying to capture her as this woman artist making, female paintings. She found it it really denigrated or tried to categorize her in that way, and it's a very diminutive thing. So she would have no part of it. She really argued that her paintings are good paintings, period. But those early wonderful nude photograph sessions that she did with Stieglitz didn't help her cause in claiming that there was no sexual component to these pieces. And to me, yeah, the forms can be sexy and all that, but so what? They're beautiful paintings. And that component in at this time is hey, here we are in 2022. There's anything goes. So but in the 1920s, this the morality that was at play at that time, this was very shocking stuff. Okay, so Charles Demuth, another one of the 291 alumni, and you can see the play of abstract forms that are in his flower painting and the ones by Georgia O'Keeffe. It wasn't like they were looking over each other's shoulders, but they were aware of each other. It was a small art world back in those days. both really beautiful paintings and very different in their own ways, but also having a kinship. And again, not going to talk too much about the flowers, but at this point, uh, Jimson Weed was one of the pieces that she did out in New Mexico, or from that experience out in New Mexico. Um, she was spending a lot more time out there, and this piece is large. It's 70 by 83 inches, and you can see these two women standing in front of it. It's a little illusory that that image looks a lot smaller than it actually is. And the other thing that I wanted to bring in, the gypsum weed photograph that was taken by O'Keeffe in the late 50s, early 60s. She got her hands on a Polaroid camera and just went crazy and was taking all kinds of photographs. One of the things I wanted to talk again about is the technique that she used to get these beautiful, subtle gradients in her paintings. So what she would do is she would take that, for instance, she would take that green and she would mix the green with white and do very distinct patches that are tonally getting darker, okay, or lighter, as the case may be. And she would paint those areas one into the next, and then basically very smoothly blend them. But she would mix those colors, those separate patches of tones of the color. And you can see that again in the flower, where she's got those beautiful subtle grays, playing off of the pinkish white. So scale is a very important piece to this picture. And she's taking something which is a very intimate, small flower that you can hold in your hand and making this thing enormous. That the wingspan on that flower is probably 68 inches wide. So this closely observed quality where she simplifies it, but it's really kind of, she's taking on an ant's view of crawling over this flower to really get a sense of the hills and valleys of that plant, of that flower. Again, an orchid, 1941, pastel. She had quite a mastery of a number of different mediums, using a very beautiful limited palette, all these grays, these beautiful grays and subtle nuanced shifts in warm and cool. If you look, there's that beautiful violet, and then there's that yellow gray, and then there's that green gray, and there's a blue gray, and all of this with the greens and yellows, and those subtle blended effects. I have but one desire as a painter, and that is to paint what I see, as I see it, in my own way, without regard for the desires or tastes of the professional dealers or the collectors. Okay. And so throughout her career, she returns again and again to charcoal, for the simple graphic form, as in, these are kind of, they look like just abstract shapes, but they're really taken from kind of elevated observation of riverbeds in the desert. So these bands that look like just abstract ribbons are really taken from observation that she sees out in the desert and translates it into these drawings. And if you look at this, basically 1959, 1956, 1919. So, this is something which is recurring throughout, and she goes back to this place to kind of mine that area of composition, of form, of shape and structure. It's very Zen-like in a way. She is constantly, actually, she is known to, there's a ancient Taoist text that she was known to have read, which is The Secret of the Golden Flower or something like that. And some of you may be familiar with this, some of you may not, but the idea is that these shapes, again, this business of the golden mean, this business of the shapes in nature, and repeatedly coming back to that. O'Keeffe wrote in a letter in 1923, "The mountain on the other side of the lake is dark, burning red when looking out the window at Stieglitz's home in Lake George." So she used to go up to Lake George with Stieglitz and his extended family. They had a campsite up there, and that was something which she would always go back to. Kandinsky's theories, his ideas on color and form and their symbolic and spiritual meanings, are transformed into her own set of beliefs. Kandinsky wrote, "Red reveals, for all its energy and intensity, a powerful note of immense, almost purposeful strength. At the core, the brilliant white sun, there is a moment of stillness and silence in the midst of intense radiating color." Kandinsky remarked about white, "It has the sound of a silence that suddenly becomes incomprehensible, the nothingness that exists before the beginning, before birth." For O'Keeffe, this painting was a blending of spirit and matter. When she said, "You paint from your subject, not what you see." Okay, and on the right is an Agnes Pelton painting. For a period of time in New Mexico, there was a group of painters. It was probably the late 30s. I'm not 100% certain about the dates on this, but there was a group of painters that called themselves the metaphysical group. And basically they were all involved in kind of this spiritual hubbub that was going on at that time. Theosophy and all that comes into it. But big forms, simplified colors, resonating shapes that interacted, color shapes that interacted. So this, there was quite a bit of that going on. I never knew this so much about O'Keeffe, but there's definitely a kind of pantheistic mysticism in this work. And one of the reasons why she became so popular in the late 60s is all these hippies were going back to the earth, and Georgia O'Keeffe was the goddess of back to the earth. Um, and here is this beautiful, beautiful drawing, subtle, and again, back to the pencil drawings. I'm gonna do a zoom if I can on this and zoom in a little bit on this painting first off. And again, you can see the subtle nuances and shifts in tone, in lightness and darkness of each of the colors. And you can see how she, built up this mountain with these beautiful light areas blended into these darker areas, and how much dimension she creates out of those gradations from light to dark. And again, in the foreground, you see this beautiful kind of permanent green that's got more, it's a warmer green from the green that's in the mountain. And in the very foreground, she adds more white to that same green, and then grades it into this yellow and this peachy stuff in the center of the whole composition kind of keeps your eye in the middle of the painting. Now, I'm going to go up here to this beautiful drawing, if I can, and tune in on this. And again, really beautiful, subtle. I believe there may be some watercolor in there too, but there's definitely, the pencil, the graphite under painting. But if anything, it's just graded washes of black. But let's go back. Okay. And now you see the relationship, where she's observing that mountain peak out there. I don't know how much plein air painting she did. I wasn't able to get to that in my research, and I'd like to get to that, how much she actually painted out there in nature. I know she did. I don't know what the size is of this painting. I think she did the paintings that she did probably outdoors were 26 by 36, so they're not gigantic. Okay. And as I said, this show, which is coming, is going to be a combination. A lot of it's going to be focused on the developments in the works on paper in relationship to the oils. And again, her subject matter is pretty far-reaching. I have focused in on a lot of the drawings in this talk because that was really kind of I wanted to get to the fundamental process of her developing her ideas, but she did a lot of bones, and tons of those gorgeous desert landscapes out there. But she also did beautiful landscapes at Lake George. And again, the bones and I'm going to zoom in on this thing too, just for a moment. And, these really subtle things that are going on, they're simplified. I'm sure there were more cracks and more fissures in that skull than she did, but the ones that she chose to give us were choice editorial moments. And this drawing, again, ram's horn. so, you know, she did these, she did the Pueblo pieces, the architectural pieces out in New Mexico, gorgeous. The bones with the sky showing through them. And again, beautiful landscape, this Black Mesa piece, early 1930. She also spent a lot of time in planes. She traveled. She wasn't a total hermit. Now that was something that she was made out to be. But you know, out in New Mexico at her ranch, she really ghost ranch. At her ranch, she grew her own food. She kind of really spent a lot of time out in nature. She would go out camping. She would set up a tent, and you know, basically she would do a lot of nocturnes and things like that. And that was out of spending the night out there in the dark, just watching and feeling the desert. And she did a whole series, gigantic series of these clouds. This is 48 by 84 inches, large scale. I saw a show of her work that was at the Whitney in probably 1971 or 72, 73. It was 73 by then. And it was a lot of these cloud pieces were in that show. And it was quite the thing. But you can see up here this tree and how close to, let me zoom in. Let me zoom in again. Where's my zoom? Let's see. Let me zoom in on these. And you can see, you know, how much the fidelity that she kept, although she invented her own colors, you know, that purple I'm not seeing out there in that landscape. There's a hint of it. And this is also a different time of day. If you look at it, the shadow is cast on that tree stump off to the left, and in the painting, it's off to the right. So the sun has shifted. So who knows? Maybe that purple came out more in that background at that time of day. But you can see how she would take from nature and edit it and use it. And so this exhibit is going to be on in the spring at the Museum of Modern Art. It's going to open April 9th and run through August. There's a wonderful YouTube that I saw, which actually does tune into kind of this early period a bit more. But there are really great YouTubes out there. And the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum out in New Mexico is someplace that you can tune in, and they have, oh God, they have dozens of video talks on aspects of O'Keeffe's work. And they also have the images on their website that you can go in and look at any period in her career. So let's see. Were there any questions that anybody had at this point? Doesn't look like it. So thank you all for coming. Hopefully Joan will be with us next time. We're going to do Cy Twombly, abstract artist who is having a show right now out in the Getty, and it's coming east. It's going to come to, I think, the Boston Museum. That's about as close as it's going to get. But oh, I'm seeing a raised hand. Let's see if I can do that. Let's see. Not quite sure how to do that one. If you can put something in the chat, I can respond to that. but I'm not exactly sure how to get at the raised hand and let you in. Uh, uh, yeah, I miss Joan. Okay. Um, so thank you all for coming, and I'll guess I'll see you next time.